In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But sometimes, there are fates worse than battle. Sometimes, there are nightmares that unfold, not in the thunder of gunfire or the clash of blades, but in the terrible silence of absolute isolation. Imagine, if you will, being the last human alive on an alien world. Not a world of the Imperium, not even a dead world where you might find some fragment of familiar architecture or the bones of your own kind. No, imagine being utterly alone on a planet dominated by Xenos. Every breath you take is an act of defiance against a universe that wants you dead. Every moment you survive is a testament to human endurance in the face of cosmic horror. This is not a theoretical scenario in the 41st millennium. This is a reality that has befallen countless souls across the Imperium's history. Men and women who, through catastrophe or cruel fate, have found themselves stranded on worlds where humanity has no place, where every living thing views them as prey, as slave, as curiosity, or simply as something to be eliminated. These are stories that rarely make it into the official Imperial records. Most of these individuals die alone, their final moments witnessed only by alien eyes. But their experiences tell us something profound about what it means to be human in a galaxy that has largely forgotten mercy. The psychological horror of such a situation cannot be overstated. In the Imperium, humans draw strength from their numbers, from the knowledge that trillions of their kind spread across 1,000,000 worlds. Even a lone Imperial guardsman on the most desperate battlefield knows that he fights alongside brothers and sisters, that his sacrifice means something to the larger whole. But to be truly alone, to know that no rescue will come because no one even knows you exist, to understand that when you die, the universe will not even notice your passing. This is a darkness that goes beyond physical danger. Consider the sensory assault of living among Xenos. Every smell would be wrong, every sound alien, every sight a reminder that you do not belong. The very air might taste different, processed through alien plant life or artificial systems designed for non-human biology. The day and night cycles could be wildly different from what human circadian rhythms expect. The colors of the sky, the pattern of weather, the behavior of local fauna, everything would be a constant assault on your sense of normalcy, a relentless reminder that you are an intruder in a world that was never meant for your kind. And then there is the question of the Xenos themselves. The galaxy teems with alien life, and each species presents its own unique nightmare for a stranded human. The brutality of the orcs, the cold efficiency of the Tau, the ancient arrogance of the Eldar, the all-consuming hunger of the Tyranids, each offers its own particular version of hell. Some might kill you quickly, others might keep you alive for reasons you can barely comprehend. Some might not even notice you exist until it is too late for you to hide. The uncertainty itself becomes a torture, not knowing from one moment to the next whether you will live or die, and which fate might actually be preferable. But before we can truly understand what it means to be the last human on a Xenos world, we must first understand the nature of these alien planets themselves. The galaxy is vast beyond human comprehension, and the Imperium of man controls perhaps only a fraction of the worlds that exist within it. The rest belong to the Xenos, to creatures whose very existence is an affront to the Imperial creed, whose ways of life challenge everything that humanity holds sacred. These worlds are as diverse as the species that inhabit them, each one a unique environment shaped by alien needs and alien desires. Let us begin by examining the different types of Xenos worlds that exist in the 41st millennium. For understanding the environment is crucial to understanding the survival challenges that a lone human would face. Each type of alien world presents its own obstacles, its own dangers, and its own slim possibilities for survival. Orc worlds are perhaps the most chaotic and violent environments imaginable. These are planets that have been conquered by the greenskin hordes, transformed through their unique biology and culture into sprawling wastelands of scrap metal, crude fortifications, and constant warfare. The orcs do not build civilizations in any sense that humans would recognize. They create something more like organized anarchy, a society held together by the principle that might makes right, and the biggest and strongest rule until someone bigger and stronger comes along to challenge them. The physical geography of an orc world is a nightmare of pollution and destruction. Orc technology, if it can even be called that, is crude and wasteful. Their factories belch toxic smoke into the atmosphere, turning skies permanently grey or orange. Their vehicles leak promethium and other chemicals into the soil, creating vast dead zones where nothing can grow. Rivers run black with industrial runoff. The air itself becomes difficult to breathe, thick with particulates, and the stench of fungal spores that the orcs shed constantly as part of their reproductive cycle. But perhaps most disturbing is the way orc worlds seem to pulse with a kind of perverse vitality. Despite all the destruction, despite the toxic environment, life flourishes in twisted forms. The orc ecosystem, if it can be called that, is entirely fungal in nature. Orcs themselves grow from spores, as do the smaller greenskin subspecies like Gretchen and Snotlings. But the fungus spreads beyond just producing more orcs. It creates strange squigs, aggressive fungal creatures that serve as everything from attack beasts to food sources for the greenskins. The landscape becomes covered in bizarre mushroom forests, some growing to enormous sizes, their caps blocking out what little clean sunlight penetrates the polluted atmosphere. For a human alone on such a world, the challenges are immediate and severe. The very air is hostile, requiring filtration to breathe safely for any length of time. Water sources are almost universally contaminated, requiring purification that might be impossible without proper equipment. Food is virtually non-existent in any form a human could safely consume. The orcs eat their squigs and fungal matter, sustenance that would likely poison a human digestive system. Any human foolish enough to consume orc food sources might find themselves infected with the same spores that allow orcs to reproduce, leading to a slow and agonizing death as fungal growths begin to sprout from their own flesh. Then there is the constant noise. Orcs are not quiet creatures. Their settlements echo day and night with the sounds of machinery, weapons testing, and the orcs themselves engaged in their endless squabbles and brawls. They speak in a harsh, guttural language that carries across vast distances. They celebrate violence with crude songs and chants. For a human trying to hide on such a world, the sensory overload would be relentless. Every moment would require vigilance, listening for the sounds of approaching greenskins, watching for the telltale signs of orc patrols. The orcs themselves present a unique challenge for a hiding human. They are not subtle creatures, nor are they particularly observant. An orc warrior is focused on fighting, on proving his strength against other orcs and any enemies he can find. They are not natural hunters in the way that some Xenos species are. However, they are also incredibly numerous and spread across every corner of their worlds. Their smaller cousins, the Gretchen, are more cowardly, but also more numerous and more likely to poke into places, looking for scraps or hiding spots. A human discovered by Gretchen would quickly find themselves surrounded by the larger greenskins as well. But here is where the psychology of survival on an orc world becomes truly interesting. The orcs have a concept they call proper scrap, or a good fight. They respect strength and violence in a way that is almost incomprehensible to humans. If a lone human were somehow able to demonstrate enough violence, enough fight, they might achieve a strange kind of respect from the orcs. Not safety, certainly, not protection, but perhaps a temporary stay of execution, a curiosity value that might buy time. Of course, this strategy would only work for as long as the human could continue to provide entertainment or demonstrate worth, and the moment they showed weakness, the orcs would turn on them without hesitation. The settlements on orc worlds are typically crude affairs, collections of shanty structures built from whatever materials are at hand. Scrap metal, wood from fungal growths, even bones from defeated enemies. All are used in orc construction. These settlements grow organically around points of interest, often a particularly large orc warboss who attracts followers through displays of strength. The settlements themselves are dangerous places, filled with competing mobs of orcs who barely tolerate each other's presence. Fights break out constantly over perceived slights or simply because the orcs are bored. For a human hiding in such a place, navigating the social dynamics would be nearly impossible. Yet despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, an orc world might offer some slim chances for human survival, at least in the short term. The sheer chaos and disorder of orc society means there are cracks, places where a clever human might hide unnoticed. Abandoned scrap heaps, forgotten corners of settlements, underground tunnels created by the orcs' haphazard mining operations, all could provide temporary shelter. The orcs' focus on violence and status means they might not notice one small human moving through the shadows, especially if that human learned to avoid drawing attention. The key to survival on an orc world would be remaining invisible and insignificant. Any human who tried to fight, to make a stand, would be quickly overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But one who learned to scavenge from orc refuse piles, who found ways to filter water and perhaps cultivate any non-fungal plant life that might have survived in protected pockets, who understood when to move and when to hide, such a human might survive for weeks or even months. Not years, certainly. The odds against long-term survival are simply too steep. But for a time, life might be possible. Now let us turn our attention to a very different type of Xenos world, those controlled by the Tau Empire. Here we find something that superficially might seem less hostile to a stranded human, but which presents its own unique psychological horrors. The Tau are not mindless brutes like the orcs, nor are they incomprehensible aliens. They are rational, organized, and deeply committed to their philosophy of the greater good. This makes them, in some ways, far more dangerous to a lone human's sense of self. Tau Sept worlds are marvels of efficient planning and technological sophistication. Where orc worlds are chaos, Tau worlds are order. Cities rise in gleaming spires of advanced materials, their designs optimized for functionality and aesthetic appeal in equal measure. Transportation networks move people and goods with mechanical precision. The environment itself is often carefully managed, with climate control systems maintaining ideal conditions and terraforming projects working to make even marginal worlds comfortable for Tau biology. The first thing a human would notice on a Tau world is how clean everything is. There is no pollution choking the air, no toxic runoff poisoning the water. The Tau take environmental stewardship seriously, understanding that a healthy world is a productive world. Their cities integrate green spaces, artificial parks where carefully selected plant life creates small oases of nature amid the urban sprawl. The air smells clean, almost sterile in its purity. Water runs clear through carefully maintained channels and pipes. By human standards, it might seem almost paradise-like, especially compared to the grim industrial nightmares of many imperial worlds. But this apparent paradise comes with invisible chains. Tau society is built on the concept of the greater good, a philosophy that subordinates individual desires to collective benefit. Every Tau knows their place in the caste system that governs their society. Fire caste warriors, earth caste workers, water caste diplomats, air caste pilots, and ethereals who lead them all. Each caste has its role, its purpose, and deviation from that role is not tolerated. The society functions because everyone accepts their place and works toward the common goal of expanding and strengthening the Tau Empire. For a human discovered on a Tau world, the initial response would likely be curiosity rather than immediate violence. The Tau have incorporated humans into their empire before, offering them membership in the greater good and a place in their expanding civilization. Entire human worlds have willingly joined the Tau, attracted by promises of advanced technology, fair treatment, and protection from the horrors of the galaxy. From the Tau perspective, finding a lone human on one of their worlds would present an opportunity for integration, for demonstrating the benefits of their philosophy. But herein lies the horror for an imperial citizen. The Tau would not simply let a human exist on their world as they are. They would seek to convert, to educate, to integrate. The human would be taken to processing centers where Tau water caste diplomats would explain the greater good, where they would be taught Tau language and customs, where they would be assigned a role in Tau society based on their skills and aptitudes. On the surface, this might seem benign, even generous. The Tau genuinely believe they are offering something better than what the Imperium provides. But for a human raised in the Imperial Creed, taught from birth that the Emperor is humanity's one true God and that all Xenos are abominations to be purged, this forced integration would be a form of psychological torture. To be told that everything you believed was wrong, that your Emperor is not divine but simply a powerful human from an ancient age, that your faith is misplaced superstition, this would shake the foundations of identity for most Imperial citizens. The Tau would not understand why the human resists. From their perspective, they are offering enlightenment, freedom from ignorant dogma, a place in a rational society that values contribution over blind faith. The actual living conditions would be comfortable by any objective measure. Tau provide good housing, adequate nutrition, medical care, and reasonable working conditions for all members of their society, including integrated humans. A human on a Tau world would not starve, would not be forced into brutal labor, would not be subjected to the casual cruelties that are common on many Imperial worlds. The Tau do not believe in suffering for its own sake. They are pragmatic, understanding that healthy, content workers are more productive than those driven by fear. But comfort is not freedom, and this is where the true nightmare of life on a Tau world reveals itself. The Tau monitor everything. Their society functions through extensive surveillance and data collection. They need to know where everyone is, what they are doing, how they are contributing to the greater good. For a human used to the relative anonymity possible on many Imperial worlds, this constant observation would be suffocating. There would be nowhere to hide, no private moments, no escape from the watchful eyes of Tau drone cameras and monitoring systems. Moreover, the Tau would control access to information. They would decide what the human could know about the wider galaxy, what news they received, what history they learned. The Tau do not lie. As such, they consider deception inefficient and counterproductive. But they certainly curate truth, presenting information in ways that support their worldview and their goals. A human on a Tau world would find themselves in a bubble of carefully managed reality, where the horrors of the galaxy are downplayed and the benefits of the greater good are constantly emphasized. For a human determined to remain true to Imperial ideals, to maintain their identity as a servant of the Emperor, survival on a Tau world would require a constant internal struggle. They would need to perform compliance while secretly maintaining their faith. They would need to appear grateful for Tau generosity while privately resenting their captivity. They would need to learn Tau language and customs well enough to function while never truly accepting the philosophy behind them. This psychological balancing act would be exhausting, a constant drain on mental and emotional resources, and there would be the nagging question, always present in the back of the mind: what if the Tau are right? What if the greater good does offer a better way of life than the brutal hierarchy of the Imperium? What if cooperation truly is superior to the endless warfare that defines human existence in the 41st millennium? For a human alone on a Tau world, cut off from the certainties of Imperial culture, these doubts would grow over time. The Tau do not break their subjects through torture or intimidation. They simply surround them with a functioning society that contradicts everything the Imperium teaches, and they wait for reason to win out over faith. The true horror, then, is not physical but spiritual. A human might survive indefinitely on a Tau world in terms of bodily needs, but would they survive as themselves? How long before the constant exposure to Tau philosophy begins to erode Imperial convictions? How long before comfort and security start to seem more important than loyalty to a distant emperor? How long before the human begins to wonder if perhaps they have not been rescued but rather freed from the chains they did not realize they wore? This is the insidious danger of the Tau. They offer a golden cage, a prison that does not look like one until you realize you cannot leave, cannot think freely, cannot be anything other than what the greater good requires you to be. For an Imperial citizen, this forced transformation of identity might be worse than simple death. At least in death, they would die as themselves, loyal to the Emperor until the end. On a Tau world, they risk losing who they are piece by piece, gradually transformed into something their former self would not recognize. But if the Tau offer a cage of comfort and false enlightenment, the Eldar present something altogether different and perhaps even more alien to human comprehension. The Eldar are an ancient race, one that achieved heights of civilization and culture long before humanity learned to make fire. Their worlds, particularly their maiden worlds, are places of haunting beauty and deep strangeness, environments that operate on principles that seem to defy human understanding of how reality should work. Maiden worlds are planets that the Eldar have seeded with life, but have not yet fully colonized. They are nature preserves on a planetary scale, carefully tended ecosystems where Eldar flora and fauna grow in patterns designed over millennia. These worlds are sacred to the Eldar, particularly to the Exodite clans who have rejected the path that led their kin to create Slaanesh. To walk on a maiden world is to step into a living work of art, a place where every tree, every stream, every hill has been placed with intention and purpose by minds that perceive beauty in ways humans struggle to comprehend. The first impression a human would have upon finding themselves on an Eldar maiden world would be one of overwhelming beauty. The forests are not the chaotic tangle of vegetation found on feral worlds or the managed forests of imperial agri-worlds. Instead, they flow like poetry, each tree positioned to create patterns visible only from above, their branches weaving together in ways that create natural galleries and archways. The undergrowth consists of plants that glow softly in twilight, creating landscapes that seem to exist in perpetual golden hour, neither quite day nor quite night. Water on these worlds runs in streams that follow courses designed by ancient Eldar shapers. Waterfalls cascade at precise angles to create specific musical tones as the water strikes rocks below. Pools form in clearings where the light filters through trees in patterns that shift throughout the day, creating light shows that would seem magical to human eyes. Even the soil seems wrong, too perfect in its composition, supporting plant life that grows with unnatural vigor and symmetry. The fauna on maiden worlds adds another layer of strangeness. These are not natural creatures, evolved through random mutation and selection. They are beings shaped by Eldar bioengineering, designed to fit specific roles in the carefully balanced ecosystem. Herbivores that move through the forests with dancer-like grace, their bodies painted in colors that complement the landscape. Predators that hunt with an elegance that seems almost rehearsed, killing without apparent cruelty, simply fulfilling their role in the cycle of life and death that the Eldar have ordained. For a human stranded on such a world, the immediate physical challenges would be less severe than on an orc world. The air is breathable, often cleaner than what most humans ever experience. Water is abundant and pure, filtered through Eldar-designed ecosystems. Food, in the form of fruits and plants, grows throughout the forests. On the surface, survival seems possible, even easy compared to the toxic wastelands of greenskin planets or the monitored streets of Tau cities. But there is something deeply wrong about maiden worlds that becomes apparent the longer a human stays. The beauty is too perfect, too intentional. There is no chaos, no randomness, none of the comfortable imperfection that characterizes natural worlds. Everything feels staged, like walking through a museum exhibit rather than a living ecosystem. The forests never feel truly wild because they are not. They are gardens, carefully maintained and monitored, even if the gardeners are not immediately visible. And indeed, the gardeners do exist. Exodite Eldar live on many maiden worlds, though their settlements are so carefully integrated into the landscape that a human might pass within meters without realizing. These Eldar have rejected the technology and complexity that led their civilization to doom, choosing instead a simpler life in harmony with nature. But simple does not mean primitive. Exodites ride great reptilian beasts called megadons, creatures that tower over trees and can level forests with their tread. They wield weapons that blend seamlessly with their aesthetic, guns that look like carved wood but fire deadly pulses of energy, blades that seem made of crystal but can cut through ceramite armor. The Exodites would not welcome a human presence on their world. To them, humans are barely evolved apes, crude and short-lived creatures whose very presence threatens to corrupt the purity of their maiden worlds. An Exodite encountering a human might not kill them immediately. The Eldar do not murder without consideration, but they would certainly see the human as an intruder, something that does not belong and must be removed before their presence spreads contamination through the carefully balanced ecosystem. Yet there is a possibility, slim as it might be, for a human to avoid immediate detection on a maiden world. The Eldar, despite their long lives and vast experience, are not numerous. Their birth rate is incredibly low, and the disaster that created Slaanesh reduced their numbers catastrophically. Even a world claimed by the Eldar might have vast stretches where no Eldar has walked in decades or centuries. The forests are extensive, the wilderness deep. A human who learned to move carefully, to avoid leaving obvious signs of their presence, might survive for some time, simply by staying away from areas the Eldar actively patrol. But here is where the psychological horror of the maiden world manifests most strongly. The human would be utterly, profoundly alone in a way that few other Xenos worlds could match. On an orc world, there is noise, chaos, the constant presence of greenskins. On a Tau world, there is structure, purpose, even if it is imposed. On a maiden world, there is only beauty and silence, and the growing realization that you are an imperfection in a perfect painting, a flaw that will eventually need to be corrected. The forests themselves seem to watch. This is not paranoia or imagination. Maiden worlds are webway connected, and the psychically active nature of Eldar civilization means that these places resonate with the thoughts and feelings of their creators. Some Imperial savants who have studied the Eldar believe that maiden worlds themselves possess a form of consciousness, a gestalt awareness created by millennia of Eldar psychic imprint. Whether or not this is true, a human on such a world would feel the weight of observation, the sense that the trees themselves are aware of the intrusion and are reporting it to parties unknown. Time becomes strange on maiden worlds. The carefully managed ecosystems do not follow natural rhythms in ways humans would recognize. Seasons shift in patterns that seem arbitrary or symbolic, rather than based on axial tilt and solar orbit. Some forests bloom eternally, while others move through cycles of growth and decay at speeds that should not be possible. For a human trying to track time, trying to maintain a sense of temporal stability, this unreliable nature of seasons and cycles would be deeply disorienting. Food, while available, presents its own challenges. The fruits and plants of a maiden world are designed for Eldar physiology, which, while similar to human in many respects, has been shaped by millions of years of different evolutionary pressures. Some of these foods might be perfectly safe for humans. Others might cause digestive distress, illness, or subtle long-term effects. A hungry human has no way to know which is which without experimentation. And experimentation with alien biology is always dangerous. Then there are the Eldar artifacts that might be found on such worlds. The Exodites, despite their rejection of high technology, still maintain certain psychically active devices. World Spirit Stones, repositories of Eldar consciousness that anchor their psychic presence to the planet. Waystone markers that guide the souls of fallen Eldar to the infinity circuits of their craft worlds. Webway portals concealed in clearings or grottos. Doorways that might connect to anywhere in the galaxy or to nowhere at all. A human stumbling upon such artifacts would likely not understand what they were looking at, but touching them could have catastrophic consequences. The greatest danger, though, would be if the human somehow attracted the attention of the Eldar themselves during a time when they were present. The Eldar do not think like humans. Their mental processes are faster, their perceptions broader, their understanding of causality more complex. When an Eldar looks at a human, they see past, present, and possible futures simultaneously. They see the threads of fate that connect that human to larger events. And if those threads suggest that this human's continued existence might somehow threaten Eldar interests, no matter how tangentially, the Eldar would not hesitate to eliminate the problem. But the elimination might not be through violence. Eldar are masters of manipulation and subtle cruelty. They might choose to let the human continue living but arrange circumstances to ensure their isolation becomes more complete, steering local predators toward the human's hiding places. subtly altering the environment to make foraging more difficult, placing psychic suggestions that create paranoia and fear. The Eldar could torment a human without ever directly confronting them, slowly driving them to madness through a campaign of psychological warfare that the human might not even realize is happening. For a human of strong faith and determination, survival on an Eldar maiden world would require a kind of mental discipline that borders on the superhuman. They would need to resist the seductive beauty that surrounds them, understanding that it is not meant for them and that accepting it would be a form of surrender. They would need to maintain their identity as human in an environment designed by and for a species that considers humanity inferior. They would need to find meaning and purpose in the face of isolation that offers no hope of rescue or escape. If the Eldar present a nightmare of alien beauty and crushing loneliness, then Tyranid-controlled worlds offer pure biological horror. When the hive fleets of the Tyranids descend upon a world, they do not conquer it in any conventional sense. They consume it, stripping every ounce of organic and mineral matter from the planet's surface and leaving behind a barren rock floating in the void. The process takes weeks or months depending on the size of the world and the strength of the hive fleet. And during that time, the planet transforms into something that resembles hell far more than any coherent ecosystem. The transformation begins almost immediately after Tyranid landing. Spores rain from the sky, billions upon billions of them, choking the atmosphere and beginning their work of breaking down existing life. These spores are the first wave of Tyranid consumption, microscopic organisms that attach themselves to every living thing they contact. They begin dissolving organic matter at the cellular level, turning flesh into nutrient slurry that flows into pools and rivers, creating veins of biological soup that the Tyranids will eventually absorb. As the spores do their work, larger Tyranid organisms establish themselves on the surface. Massive capillary towers sprout from the ground, organic structures that can reach kilometers into the sky. These towers serve as collection points, sucking up the dissolved biomass and channeling it to the hive ships in orbit. The towers pulse and throb with obscene vitality, their surfaces covered in glistening membranes that secrete digestive acids and absorb nutrients. They are living things on a scale that defies comprehension, each one containing more biomass than an imperial hive city. The ground itself changes as Tyranid creep spreads across the landscape. This bacterial carpet covers everything, breaking down soil and stone, extracting useful minerals, and leaving behind only sterile dust. The creep is not one uniform substance, but rather a constantly shifting ecology of Tyranid microorganisms, each adapted for specific tasks of consumption and conversion. It spreads at visible speeds, advancing like a tide across the land, consuming forests, cities, mountains, everything in its path. For a human somehow surviving the initial Tyranid assault and finding themselves alone on a world undergoing this transformation, the situation would be beyond desperate. The very air becomes hostile within days, thick with spores that burn the lungs and cause tissue damage with every breath. Without a sealed environmental suit and reliable filters, breathing becomes agony. The human body would begin to break down as the spores work their way into the bloodstream, causing lesions, internal hemorrhaging, and eventually catastrophic organ failure. Water sources become useless even faster. The Tyranids target water deliberately, seeding lakes and rivers with organisms designed to convert water into more complex biological compounds that can be more easily absorbed. What was once fresh water becomes thick, syrupy fluid that smells of decay and corruption. Drinking it would be fatal within hours, as the Tyranid organisms in the water begin their work of dissolving the drinker from the inside. Food becomes an impossible dream. Any plants or animals that survived the initial invasion are quickly consumed by the spore fall and the spreading creep. The Tyranids themselves are not edible in any sense that human biology would recognize. Their flesh is designed for absorption back into the hive fleet, and consumption by any other organism leads to rapid toxic shock. Even if a human were desperate enough to try eating Tyranid matter, their body would reject it violently, leading to vomiting, convulsions, and death. But perhaps worse than any of these physical challenges is the presence of the Tyranids themselves. A world undergoing consumption is crawling with tyrannid organisms of every size and function. Termagants and hormagaunts scurry through the ruins of civilization, their weapons forever seeking movement to target. Warriors stride across the landscape, larger and more intelligent, coordinating lesser organisms through the psychic link of the hive mind. Carnifexes demolish structures that still stand, their massive claws and biological cannons reducing adamantium and plasteel to scrap. All of these organisms are connected to the hive mind, the vast psychic intelligence that coordinates tyrannid activity across entire star systems. This means that anywhere a human hides, they are potentially detectable. The hive mind processes sensory information from millions of organisms simultaneously, creating a level of surveillance that makes Tau monitoring systems look primitive. A human's scent, their body heat, the sound of their heartbeat, any of these might be detected by one of the countless tyrannid organisms, and the information instantly transmitted to the hive mind. Yet despite this, or perhaps because of it, there might be the slimmest chance of short-term survival for a human on a tyrannid world. The hive mind is focused on consumption, efficiency. Its organisms are directed toward areas of high biomass concentration, toward targets that represent significant resources. A single human represents so little biomass that they might not be worth the effort of hunting down, especially in the chaos of a world undergoing consumption. If a human could find a location that the tyrannids have already processed and moved on from, a place stripped of everything valuable and thus no longer of interest, they might be overlooked. This would be a grim existence beyond description. Surrounded by the biological waste products of tyrannid consumption, pools of toxic slurry, and the skeletal remains of capillary towers already drained of their purpose, the human would exist in a dead zone that even the tyrannids have abandoned. They would need a sealed environment suit capable of recycling their air and water indefinitely, technology that is rare even in the Imperium. They would need a way to generate or acquire nutrients without leaving their shelter. They would need to remain absolutely still and quiet whenever tyrannid organisms pass nearby, hoping that the hive mind's vast but not infinite processing power overlooks their insignificant biosignature. The psychological toll of such existence would break most humans within days. To be surrounded by the evidence of consumption on a planetary scale, to know that every living thing on the world has been dissolved and absorbed, to understand that the same fate awaits you if you are discovered, this is horror that transcends the physical. The sounds alone would drive many to madness. The wet, organic noises of tyrannid movement, the pulsing rhythm of capillary towers pumping biomass into orbit, the distant shrieks of tyrannid organisms calling to each other through alien vocal systems, all of it would create a symphony of nightmare that never stops, never sleeps. And there would be no hope. Unlike other Xenos worlds, where rescue, however unlikely, remains theoretically possible, a world in the grip of tyrannid consumption is marked for death by the entire Imperium. Imperial protocol regarding tyrannid incursions is clear. Evacuate what can be evacuated, and if evacuation is impossible, execute exterminatus. Better to destroy a world completely than allow the hive fleets to gain its biomass. This means that any human surviving on a tyrannid world would know, with absolute certainty, that if the Imperium does arrive, it will not be to rescue them. It will be to ensure that nothing, including them, survives for the tyrannids to consume. The final stage of tyrannid consumption sees the departure of the hive fleet. When every useful resource has been extracted, when the capillary towers have pumped the last drops of biomass into orbit, when even the minerals have been stripped from the bedrock, the tyrannids leave. They abandon the world as they found it, lifeless, but now truly dead, in a way that few places in the galaxy can claim to be. What remains is a smooth globe of grey stone, its atmosphere thin and toxic, its surface scoured clean of every organic molecule. Nothing lives there. Nothing can live there. It is a monument to extinction, a world murdered so thoroughly that even bacteria cannot survive. If somehow, impossibly, a human was still alive when the tyrannids left, they would find themselves on the most dead world imaginable. No air to breathe except what their suit recycled. no water except what they could reclaim from their own waste, no hope of finding any resources whatsoever. They would exist in perfect isolation on a dead rock, waiting for their suit systems to fail, for their recycled air to finally run out, for starvation or thirst or simple despair to claim them. In many ways, this final loneliness would be the cruelest fate of all. Having examined the different types of Xenos worlds and the unique challenges each presents, we must now consider how a human might find themselves in such a desperate situation in the first place. The galaxy is vast, and war is constant, creating countless opportunities for individuals to become separated from their kind and stranded on alien planets. Understanding these pathways to isolation helps us appreciate the scale of this tragedy that has befallen unknown thousands across the Imperium's history. The most common way for humans to end up alone on Xenos worlds is through military disaster. The Imperial Guard fights on thousands of fronts simultaneously, and not every battle ends in victory or even organized retreat. Sometimes entire regiments are overwhelmed, their positions overrun by Xenos forces moving faster than Imperial command can respond. In the chaos of such defeats, individual soldiers can become separated from their units, lost in alien terrain as their comrades are killed or captured around them. Consider the case of a guardsman fighting against an orc incursion. The battle has turned against the Imperial forces. The Greenskins have broken through defensive lines, and the retreat has become a rout. In the confusion, our guardsman becomes separated from his squad. Perhaps he fell into a crater and was momentarily stunned. Perhaps he was pursuing a fleeing enemy and moved too far from his unit. Perhaps he simply got turned around in the smoke and chaos and went the wrong direction. Whatever the cause, when the dust settles and the sounds of battle fade, he finds himself alone on a world that has fallen to the orcs. His regiment has either been evacuated or destroyed. The Imperial Navy has withdrawn. He is, for all practical purposes, abandoned. Similar scenarios play out across the galaxy with depressing regularity. A Space Marine strike force conducting raids against a Tau expansion fleet might leave behind a brother who was too badly wounded to evacuate, believing him dead, but finding that his enhanced biology kept him alive long enough for the Tau to discover him. A scouting party investigating suspected Tyranid activity might lose members to ambush, with survivors scattered across the landscape and unable to regroup before the full hive fleet arrives. An Imperial Navy crew might survive their ship's crash onto an Eldar world, only to be hunted down one by one until a single individual remains, hiding in the wreckage and hoping for rescue that will never come. Civilian scenarios are perhaps even more tragic because the individuals involved had no choice in their presence on these worlds. Transport ships travel constantly between Imperial worlds, carrying colonists, pilgrims, merchants, and refugees. When these ships are attacked or suffer catastrophic failure, they might crash on whatever world is nearest, and that world might be anything from an Imperial agri-world to a Tyranid-infested death world. Survivors of such crashes, if any exist, would have no military training, no weapons beyond what they could scavenge, no understanding of Xenos threats beyond abstract fears from Imperial propaganda. Imagine a young woman from an Imperial hive world, traveling to a new colony to start a better life. Her transport is damaged during a warp jump, exiting far from its intended destination. The ship limps toward the nearest habitable planet for emergency repairs, but before it can land, systems fail completely. The crash is catastrophic. Hundreds die on impact. More die in the hours that follow from injuries or fires. Our survivor emerges from the wreckage to find herself on what appears to be a lush, beautiful world. Only later does she realize the terrible truth. She is on an Eldar maiden world, and she is utterly alone. Pirates and slavers operating in the dark spaces between stars create another pathway to stranded isolation. These criminals prey on weak or undefended vessels, taking what they want and disposing of the rest. Sometimes they maroon captives on uninhabited worlds, considering it more entertaining than simple execution. But their knowledge of what constitutes an uninhabited world is often incomplete. A world that appears empty on long-range scans might host a Xenos settlement on its far side, or might be claimed by aliens who do not maintain obvious surface structures. Marooned prisoners might not realize their mistake until it is far too late. The navigator houses and rogue trader dynasties also contribute to this grim tally, though unintentionally. These powerful organizations conduct explorations into unknown regions of space, mapping worlds that the Imperium has never contacted. Sometimes, these explorations go wrong. Navigators might suffer psychic accidents that leave their ships stranded in real space, near uncharted worlds. Rogue traders might lose crew members to accidents or hostile encounters on alien planets. When these incidents occur far from Imperial support, in regions where no rescue is possible, the stranded individuals must make do with whatever they can find. And what they find might be a world already claimed by Xenos. There are also the victims of Xenos activity itself. The Dark Eldar raid Imperial worlds for slaves, taking them to the twisted nightmare of Camorra for fates worse than death. But sometimes these raids are interrupted or go wrong. A Dark Eldar raiding party might be forced to abandon some of their captives to escape Imperial response. Those captives, freed from their chains but still far from home, might find themselves on whatever world the Dark Eldar were using as a staging ground. Orc raiders similarly take prisoners, though more as curiosities or potential entertainment than for any practical purpose. When orcs lose interest or are distracted by better fights, these prisoners might be forgotten, left alive, but abandoned on orc-controlled worlds. Chaos presents its own particular pathways to isolation. Cultists and traitors who flee Imperial justice might seek refuge on Xenos worlds, believing that anything is preferable to facing the Emperor's wrath. These individuals might deliberately seek out alien civilizations, hoping to trade information or service for protection. But Xenos have little use for human traitors, and such individuals often find themselves abandoned once any useful intelligence has been extracted. Similarly, survivors of Chaos incursions, who refuse to embrace the ruinous powers, might flee to Xenos territories, choosing alien presence over demonic corruption, only to discover that this choice leads to a different but equally terrible fate. Even the Imperium itself sometimes creates these situations through deliberate action. Penal legions are dispatched to the most dangerous war zones, expected to die in service to the Emperor as penance for their crimes. When these missions are considered expendable, when command decides that the objective matters more than the lives of those achieving it, survivors might be intentionally left behind on hostile worlds. The Imperium is vast, and bureaucracy is slow. Records are lost, orders misunderstood, units declared destroyed when individuals still live. For those individuals, official death might mean they are never even sought by rescue operations. Inquisitors conducting secret investigations into Xenos threats might lose acolytes during their operations. These operatives, sworn to secrecy about their mission, cannot simply call for help if stranded. They must complete their objectives or die trying, and if their Inquisitor moves on to the next mission believing them dead, there is no one else who even knows they exist. For an acolyte stranded on a Tau world after a covert operation goes wrong, or trapped on an orc planet while attempting to gather intelligence on greenskin movements, the secret nature of their work becomes a prison that ensures no rescue will come. The Adeptus Mechanicus loses members in similar ways during their quest for knowledge. Tech priests exploring STC fragments or investigating Xenos technology might become separated from their teams. If the technology they sought proves dangerous, or if Xenos guardians prove more formidable than expected, survivors might find themselves stranded with no way to contact their Forge world. The Mechanicus keeps extensive records, but their operations span entire sectors, and a single tech priest lost on a distant world might not be noticed as missing for decades. Finally, there are those who become stranded through sheer, terrible luck. Warp storms that isolate entire sectors might leave individual ships trapped in real space near Xenos worlds. A soldier on leave might be visiting a border world when Xenos invasion strikes, becoming separated from evacuating civilians. A pilgrim might become lost during chaos at a starport and miss the last transport before enemy occupation. A child might wander too far from a settlement on a contested world and become lost in alien territory. The galaxy is indifferent to human suffering, and chance alone can transform an ordinary moment into the beginning of a nightmare. In all these cases, the common thread is separation and isolation. These individuals find themselves cut off from the vast human presence that normally defines existence in the Imperium. They go from being one among billions or trillions to being utterly alone, the only representative of their species on entire worlds. The psychological shock of this transition cannot be overstated. Human beings are social creatures. We define ourselves in relation to others, draw strength from community, create meaning through shared experience. To lose all of that in an instant, to become singular in the worst possible way, this breaks many before any physical danger even manifests. Understanding these pathways to isolation also reveals an uncomfortable truth about the Imperium and the galaxy it inhabits. These situations are not rare aberrations. They happen constantly, on a scale that would be horrifying if anyone had the capacity to measure it accurately. Every day, across thousands of worlds, humans become separated from their kind and stranded on alien planets. Most die quickly, within hours or days. Some survive longer, weeks or months, fighting desperately against impossible odds. A very few might live for years, adapting to their circumstances in ways that would seem miraculous if anyone knew of their existence. But almost none are rescued. The Imperium lacks the resources to mount rescue operations for individuals, especially individuals lost on Xenos worlds. Even if the authorities knew someone was stranded, even if that person's location could be determined, the cost of extracting them would be prohibitive compared to the value of a single human life. The Imperium measures value in populations, in worlds, in strategic resources. One person, no matter how brave or resourceful, matters little in the calculations of sector command. This grim arithmetic creates a situation where countless humans live out desperate existences on alien worlds, their survival unknown to the Imperium they still serve, their eventual deaths unmarked and unmourned. They are the forgotten casualties of the endless war, individuals who fell through the cracks of an empire too vast to notice their absence. Their stories would never be told, their struggles never recorded, their final moments witnessed only by alien eyes that cannot understand or do not care about the significance of what they witness. Having established how humans come to be stranded on Xenos worlds, we must now examine what survival actually looks like in these circumstances. How does a human endure when every element of their environment is hostile? What strategies might offer even temporary reprieve from the certainty of death? What resources exist that might be exploited? What patterns might be learned? What adaptations might be possible? The answers vary depending on the type of world, but certain principles emerge that apply across different scenarios. The first and most critical resource for any stranded human is information. Understanding the nature of the Xenos you share the world with, their behaviors, their patterns, their weaknesses. This knowledge can mean the difference between quick death and prolonged survival. On an orc world, a human must learn the rhythms of greenskin activity. When do orc mobs typically sleep, if they sleep at all? Where do they focus their attention? What areas do they consider important enough to guard? And what areas do they ignore? The orcs themselves provide constant information through their loud, aggressive behavior. Listen to their fights and understand the social hierarchies. Watch which directions they travel and learn where their settlements concentrate. Observe how they react to different stimuli and use that knowledge to avoid triggering responses that end in violence directed at you. On a Tau world, information gathering is simultaneously easier and more dangerous. The Tau document everything, create vast databases, maintain communication networks that span their empire. A human with the right skills might be able to access this information, learning about Tau movements, finding maps of their settlements, understanding their patrol schedules. But this same documentation works against you. The Tau know where their surveillance systems are, where their patrols should be, where unauthorized movement would be detected. Outsmarting a society built on information control requires becoming better at information gathering than they are, a nearly impossible task, but one that represents the only real hope for maintaining any freedom of movement. On Eldar worlds, information is more mystical and more difficult to acquire. The Eldar operate on principles that seem almost magical to human observers. their actions guided by prophecy and farseeing rather than logical planning. A human cannot predict where Eldar will be through simple pattern analysis, because the Eldar themselves move according to visions of possible futures, but observation can still yield results. Watch the forests and learn which areas show signs of Eldar passage. Note the placement of their artifacts and avoid those locations. Pay attention to the behavior of the world's fauna, creatures that might react to Eldar presence in ways that provide warning to an attentive observer. On Tyranid worlds, information gathering becomes a race against time. The human must quickly determine which areas the Tyranids have already processed and abandoned, which zones still contain active organisms, which direction the consumption is moving. This requires understanding Tyranid behavior at a basic level. The hive mind is efficient, but follows patterns driven by resource acquisition. It focuses on high-density biomass first, then spreads outward, systematically. If you can determine the pattern of consumption, you might be able to stay ahead of it, at least temporarily, moving into zones the Tyranids have already stripped and have no reason to return to. The second critical element of survival is shelter. A human, exposed to the elements on any of these worlds, will die quickly. On Orc worlds, shelter might be found in the ruins of whatever civilization the Greenskins conquered, in collapsed buildings or underground structures that the Orcs have not bothered to fully explore. These spaces are dangerous, potentially unstable, filled with hazards ranging from sharp debris to unexploded munitions. But they provide concealment, protection from the toxic atmosphere if the structure is reasonably intact, and thermal insulation against temperature extremes. The key is finding shelter that offers these benefits while being in areas the Orcs have no reason to visit. On Tau worlds, conventional hiding places are nearly useless because of the surveillance infrastructure. However, the Tau are not omniscient. Their systems have blind spots, edges, and boundaries where coverage overlaps imperfectly. A human might find refuge in industrial areas that are automated and rarely visited by Tau workers, in maintenance tunnels that carry utilities beneath cities, in storage facilities for materials that are not frequently accessed. The challenge is that the Tau will eventually notice anomalies in their systems. Power consumption that does not match expected patterns, resources that disappear without explanation, doors that open when no authorized individual is present. Surviving on a Tau world requires constantly moving, never staying in one shelter long enough for the patterns of your presence to become obvious. Eldar Maiden worlds present different shelter challenges. The natural landscape provides caves, overhangs, dense forest coverage. But remember that these worlds are designed environments. That cave you shelter in might be sacred to the Eldar for reasons you cannot perceive. That dense forest might be regularly patrolled because it contains plants that require specific tending. The key on Maiden worlds is finding locations that are truly remote, areas so far from Eldar interests that they are visited only rarely. This means traveling to the edges of the habitable zones, to places where the careful Eldar design gives way to wilderness that has been deliberately left unmanaged. These areas are harsher, less beautiful, more dangerous in natural ways, but precisely because of this, less likely to attract Eldar attention. On Tyranid worlds, shelter must be absolutely sealed. The spores in the atmosphere will kill an unprotected human within days. This means finding or creating airtight spaces, rooms that can be sealed against the outside environment. A crashed ship, if one is available, might serve this purpose if its hull integrity remains intact. Industrial structures with blast doors and atmospheric controls could work. Even a simple room with a working airlock becomes viable shelter if its life support systems can be maintained. The challenge is that all of these options require power, and power sources on a world undergoing Tyranid consumption are limited and decreasing constantly. Food and water represent perhaps the most insurmountable challenges for long-term survival. On Orc worlds, human-safe food sources are virtually non-existent. Everything the Orcs grow or raise is part of their fungal ecosystem, toxic to human physiology. Water can be found, but it requires extensive filtration to remove the spores and chemical contaminants that permeate all liquid sources. A stranded human would need working filtration equipment and replacement filters, resources that will run out eventually. Some humans might attempt to establish small gardens in hidden locations, cultivating plants from seeds if any were available, but the toxic environment makes such efforts difficult, and the presence of growing plants might attract orc attention. Tau worlds offer more hope for sustenance because the Tau themselves maintain food production systems designed for carbon-based life forms. They grow crops and raise livestock, though both are optimized for Tau biology rather than human. A desperate human might be able to steal from Tau food stores, though this brings enormous risk of discovery. Alternatively, some Tau agricultural facilities might be automated, with harvesting and processing done by drones. Learning the patterns of these systems could allow a human to take small amounts without triggering alerts. But again, this is temporary. Eventually, the discrepancies will be noticed, and security will be increased. On maiden worlds, food is theoretically abundant. The forests produce fruits, nuts, berries, but Eldar biology, while similar to human, is not identical. What nourishes an Eldar might sicken or poison a human. Trial and error becomes necessary, sampling small amounts of different plants and waiting to see what effects they produce. Some Imperial citizens might have rudimentary knowledge of which Xenos plants are safe for human consumption. Information passed down through generations of soldiers and explorers. But this knowledge is incomplete and often unreliable. Many humans have died from eating what they believed was safe based on inadequate information. On Tyranid worlds, food and water become moot points after the first few days of consumption. There is nothing safe to eat, nothing safe to drink. Survival depends entirely on whatever supplies the human had with them when stranded, and how long those supplies can be made to last. Strict rationing becomes essential, even knowing that it only delays the inevitable. Some might attempt to reclaim water from their own waste through mechanical recycling, but this requires equipment that most stranded individuals would not possess. When the supplies run out, that is simply the end. Medical care is another critical survival concern that receives little attention until injury or illness strikes. On Orc worlds, any injury can become fatal without proper treatment. The toxic environment turns minor cuts into infected wounds that refuse to heal. Respiratory illnesses develop from breathing partially filtered air. Digestive issues arise from contaminated food and water. Without medical supplies, even a trained medic can do little more than provide comfort. Imperial guardsmen might carry basic medical kits, but these are designed for battlefield injuries, not long-term survival in hostile environments. When the supplies run out, when antibiotics are exhausted and wounds suppurate, there is nothing to be done but endure. On Tau worlds, medical care might be accessible through theft or deception, but it carries enormous risk. Tau medical facilities are monitored, and a human appearing in such locations would be immediately identified and captured. However, Tau medical technology is advanced, and if a human could somehow acquire Tau medical supplies without being caught, they might be able to treat conditions that would be fatal with Imperial technology. The challenge is that Tau medical systems are often designed to interface with Tau biology specifically, and adapting them for human use might be impossible without proper knowledge. Eldar medical knowledge is legendary, capable of healing injuries that would be permanent with Imperial technology, but accessing such knowledge as a human is impossible. The Eldar would never waste their skills on what they consider an inferior species. Moreover, Eldar healing often involves psychic elements that interact with the spirit as well as the body, techniques that might not even work on human subjects. A human injured on a maiden world must rely on their own limited knowledge and whatever supplies they possess, knowing that recovery from serious injuries is unlikely. On Tyranid worlds, injury is essentially a death sentence. The spores in the environment attack damaged tissue with particular aggression. Any break in the skin becomes an entry point for organisms that immediately begin dissolving flesh. There is no treatment for this beyond completely sealed wound care, and even that might fail if spores have already entered the bloodstream. Many humans in this situation might choose to end their lives quickly if seriously injured, rather than endure the slow horror of being dissolved from the inside. Psychological survival strategies become as important as physical ones the longer the isolation continues. Human minds are not designed for solitary existence, and the stress of being alone on an alien world creates mental health challenges that can be as dangerous as any physical threat. Some humans cope by maintaining strict routines, creating structure in their days, even when circumstances seem to render such structure meaningless. Wake at a specific time, perform specific tasks, exercise, clean equipment, scout for resources, return to shelter before the Xenos become active, sleep. The routine becomes a lifeline, something predictable and controllable in a situation where almost nothing is controllable. Others cope by creating imaginary companions, talking to absent friends or family members, maintaining conversations with the emperor or other figures of religious significance. This might seem like a descent into madness, but it serves a psychological function, preserving the social aspects of human cognition that would otherwise atrophy. The human brain needs social interaction to function properly, and if real interaction is impossible, simulated interaction is better than nothing. Some humans maintain detailed records of their experiences, writing journals on whatever materials are available. This serves multiple purposes. It helps process trauma by externalizing thoughts and fears. It provides a sense of purpose, creating a document that might someday be recovered and provide valuable intelligence. It maintains linguistic and writing skills that might otherwise degrade in the absence of regular use. Even knowing that the journal will probably never be read, the act of creating it matters. Faith becomes either a source of strength or a source of despair, depending on the individual and their circumstances. Imperial creed teaches that the emperor watches over all humanity, that faith can provide protection even in the darkest situations. For some stranded humans, this belief sustains them, giving meaning to their suffering and hope that their ordeal serves a larger purpose. They pray regularly, perform religious rituals, maintain their identity as servants of the emperor, even when no other humans exist to witness their faith. But for others, isolation on a Xenos world shatters faith. If the emperor truly protects his servants, why has he allowed this to happen? If humanity is the rightful inheritor of the galaxy, why does it seem so vulnerable, so easily scattered and destroyed? These questions gnaw at faith, creating doubt that grows with each passing day of abandonment. Some humans lose their faith entirely, becoming bitter and cynical, questioning everything they were taught. Others develop new forms of spirituality, incorporating elements of their environment in ways that would be considered heretical by any imperial authority. The question of how long a human can survive on a Xenos world has no single answer. The variables are too numerous, the circumstances too diverse. On an Orc world, a well-equipped and trained soldier might survive for weeks or even months if they were clever, cautious, and lucky. An unprepared civilian might die within days. On a Tau world, someone with the right skills could potentially survive indefinitely if they were willing to eventually integrate into Tau society, though maintaining any real independence would be nearly impossible. On a Maiden world, survival might last years for someone with survival training and the will to endure profound isolation. On a Tyrannid world undergoing active consumption, survival measured in days would be remarkable, and anything beyond that would require circumstances so unlikely as to be essentially miraculous. But survival itself becomes a question of definition. Is a human who has lost all hope of rescue, who exists from one day to the next without purpose or direction, truly surviving? Is maintaining biological function enough? Or must there be some quality of life, some reason for continuing? Many stranded humans face moments where they must decide whether survival is worth the cost, whether continuing to fight is meaningful or simply prolonging the inevitable. Some choose to end their lives on their own terms, preferring that to waiting for death to find them. Others fight to the last moment, driven by something beyond rational calculation, by a stubborn refusal to surrender, even when surrender is the only logical option. There have been documented cases throughout Imperial history of individuals surviving for remarkable periods on Xenos worlds, though these cases are exceptional and rarely end with rescue. The most famous, at least among those with access to classified Imperial records, is the case of Captain Marcus Kane of the Cadian Shock Troops. Kane was separated from his regiment during the defense of a world against an Orc invasion in the Cadian Gate region. The planet fell, and Kane was left behind when Imperial forces withdrew. He survived on that Orc world for 7 years, before being discovered by a later Imperial campaign to retake the planet. When found, Kane was barely recognizable as human. He had built a complex network of hidden shelters throughout the ruins of the former capital city, moving between them according to patterns he had learned over years of observing Orc behavior. He had developed methods for filtering water that were crude but effective. He had even managed to cultivate a small garden in a sealed underground chamber, growing vegetables from seeds he had salvaged early in his isolation. His clothes were makeshift, cobbled together from looted Orc materials and scavenged fabric. His hair and beard had grown long and wild. He spoke in a voice that sounded unused, rusty from years of silence. But what struck the soldiers who found him most was his mental state. Kane had not descended into madness despite his isolation. He had maintained his identity as an Imperial soldier, performed daily devotions to the Emperor, kept detailed records of everything he observed about Orc behavior and movements. When rescued, he immediately began debriefing Imperial intelligence on what he had learned, providing information that proved valuable in the campaign to retake the world. He was lauded as a hero, given commendations, promoted, but those who spoke with him privately reported that he seemed distant, disconnected, as if part of him had never truly left the Orc world, where he spent 7 years alone. Kane's case is exceptional because it ended in rescue, but it illustrates what is possible for a human with the right combination of skills, resources, and determination. However, for every case like Kane's, there are thousands where the outcome is less fortunate. Imperial records contain references to other stranded individuals who were eventually discovered dead, their skeletal remains found in makeshift shelters, their final moments unknowable. Some left behind journals or recordings that provided insight into their experiences. Others left nothing but bones and questions. One particularly tragic case comes from the archives of the Ordo Xenos, though details are heavily redacted. An inquisitorial acolyte named Serena Voss was investigating Tau expansion in a border sector when her transport was destroyed. She managed to reach the surface of a Tau sept world, but was unable to contact her inquisitor or arrange extraction. Voss survived for 3 years on that world, hiding in automated industrial facilities and surviving on stolen Tau rations. She maintained detailed video logs, documenting her observations of Tau society and her efforts to remain undetected. Her logs reveal a slow psychological deterioration despite her best efforts. In early recordings, she is professional and focused, treating her situation as an extended intelligence-gathering operation. As months pass, the isolation begins to affect her. She talks more to the camera, treating it as a companion. She begins expressing doubts about Imperial dogma, questioning whether the Tau way of life might actually be superior in some regards. By the 3rd year, her logs have become confused and contradictory, sometimes defending the Imperium passionately, other times contemplating whether surrender to the Tau would be such a terrible fate. The final log, recorded mere days before her eventual capture by Tau authorities, shows Voss in a state of near-complete breakdown. She appears emaciated, having been unable to maintain adequate nutrition on stolen supplies. She speaks about hearing voices, about seeing things in the shadows. When the Tau finally found her, they attempted to integrate her into their society as they had done with other humans. But Voss was too damaged by her years of isolation. She never adapted to Tau culture, never accepted the greater good. She died less than a year after her capture, officially of medical complications, though inquisitorial analysts who reviewed her case suspected she simply lost the will to live once the struggle of survival ended. These cases, and others like them, tell us something important about human resilience and its limits. Humans can survive extraordinary circumstances for remarkable periods. We can adapt to environments that should kill us, learn to thrive in conditions that seem impossible. But there are breaking points, psychological limits that even the strongest cannot overcome indefinitely. Isolation is one of those limits. Without social connection, without community, without the sense of being part of something larger, humans begin to deteriorate in ways that go beyond physical health. This brings us to perhaps the cruelest aspect of being stranded on a Xenos world. The knowledge that rescue is unlikely, bordering on impossible. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, containing thousands of sectors, millions of worlds, and trillions of human souls. The bureaucracy required to manage such an empire is equally vast, and individuals get lost in it constantly. A soldier listed as killed in action will not be searched for, even if they are still alive. A civilian whose transport is destroyed is assumed dead unless they somehow make contact to prove otherwise. And even if someone realizes that a person is missing, even if that person's location is somehow determined, mounting a rescue operation requires resources that might not be available or might not be considered worthwhile for the sake of a single individual. There are exceptions, of course. High-value targets like Inquisitors, Space Marine chapter masters, or holders of critical intelligence might warrant rescue attempts. Rogue traders with sufficient wealth and influence can arrange their own rescue if they go missing. Navigator houses protect their own, sending search parties when navigators disappear. But the vast majority of stranded humans have no such advantages. They are common soldiers, ordinary civilians, people of no particular importance to the vast machinery of the Imperium. For them, rescue is not a realistic hope. It is a fantasy, a comforting dream that helps them sleep at night but bears no relationship to reality. This knowledge can manifest in different ways psychologically. Some humans maintain hope despite understanding the odds, clinging to the possibility that someone will come because the alternative is too dark to contemplate. They scan the skies for ships. They maintain their survival routine so that when rescue comes, they will be ready. They convince themselves that every passing day brings them closer to salvation. This hope can sustain them through incredible hardship, but it can also make their eventual realization of the truth more devastating when it finally penetrates their defenses. Others accept from the beginning that rescue will not come. They survive day to day without expectation of anything beyond survival itself. This grim pragmatism can actually be adaptive, allowing them to make decisions without the distorting influence of false hope. But it also raises the question of purpose. If you will never be rescued, if your survival means nothing to anyone but yourself, why continue? What is the point of enduring day after day of fear and struggle if the only certainty is that eventually you will die alone and forgotten? Some find purpose in spite, in refusing to give the galaxy the satisfaction of killing them easily. Others find it in faith, believing that their suffering has meaning even if they cannot perceive it. Still others find it in simple stubbornness, continuing because stopping is not in their nature. And yes, some find no purpose at all and choose to end their existence rather than face another day of meaningless struggle. None of these responses is wrong. Each represents a different way of coping with circumstances that are fundamentally unnatural for social creatures like humans. The question of rescue also intersects with the nature of the Xenos worlds themselves. On some worlds, escape might be technically possible, even if rescue is not. A human on a Tau world might potentially steal a spacecraft if they had the necessary skills, though the odds of successfully navigating Tau security systems and then surviving long enough in space to reach Imperial territory are vanishingly small. A human on a maiden world might discover a webway portal and, through incredible luck, emerge somewhere. They could seek help, though using Eldar technology without understanding it is more likely to lead to death or worse. A human on an Orc world might stow away on a Rox or ship when the Greenskins move to their next target, though hiding among Orcs during space travel would be almost impossible. On a Tyranid world, escape is not possible through any means available to a lone human. The hive ships in orbit would detect and destroy any vessel attempting to leave. And even if someone managed to launch, where would they go? A world under Tyranid attack is typically surrounded by the rest of the hive fleet. Millions of organisms in space, waiting to consume any biomass that escapes the planet. No, on a Tyranid world, survival ends when consumption is complete. There is no escape, only the choice of how to face the end. But let us consider what rescue would actually mean for someone who has survived alone on a Xenos world for an extended period. The physical challenges of reintegration would be significant. A person who has survived on marginal nutrition would need careful medical management to recover healthy weight. A person who has breathed toxic air through makeshift filters would likely have permanent lung damage. A person who has lived in constant stress and fear would have compromised immune function and potentially serious cardiovascular problems. The Imperial medical system, such as it is, would need to provide extensive care to return the individual to anything approaching normal health. But the psychological challenges would be even more severe. Someone who has survived alone has necessarily adapted to that aloneness in ways that make reintegration difficult. The social skills that most humans take for granted atrophy without use. Reading emotional cues, engaging in small talk, understanding social hierarchies, all of these become challenging after extended isolation. The rescued individual might find themselves unable to connect with others, unable to explain what they have experienced in ways that others can understand or relate to. There would also be a profound sense of alienation. The person who was stranded has experienced something that marks them as fundamentally different from those around them. They have stared into the abyss of isolation and survived, and that experience creates a divide between them and everyone who has never faced such circumstances. Conversations seem trivial. Problems that others consider serious seem insignificant compared to the daily struggle for survival on a Xenos world. The rescued individual might find themselves longing, paradoxically, for the simplicity of their isolation, where at least the challenges were clear and the stakes obvious. The Imperium has mechanisms for dealing with such individuals, though they are not designed with the person's well-being in mind. Debriefing by Imperial intelligence, or the Inquisition, would be thorough and invasive, extracting every piece of information about the Xenos world and the species encountered. The individual would be questioned about what they observed, what they learned, what weaknesses they might have discovered. This process could last for months, and it would feel less like help and more like interrogation. After debriefing, the individual's fate would depend on various factors. If they possessed valuable intelligence or had demonstrated exceptional qualities during their survival, they might be recruited by Imperial organizations that could use such skills. The Inquisition, Imperial intelligence services, even certain military units value individuals who have proven themselves capable of surviving impossible circumstances. But this would not be freedom. It would simply be a different kind of service, often more dangerous than the circumstances that led to their initial stranding. If the individual was deemed to have no particular value beyond the intelligence they provided, they would likely be assigned to some standard Imperial role and expected to integrate back into normal life. But normal life would never feel normal again. The rescued individual would carry their experiences as invisible scars, marks that separate them from their fellow citizens in ways that can never be fully bridged. And there would always be the question of contamination, both physical and spiritual. The Inquisition would need to be satisfied that the individual had not been corrupted by their exposure to Xenos, had not developed sympathies or understandings that might make them a threat to Imperial orthodoxy. This examination would be intrusive and humiliating, questioning the individual's faith, loyalty, and mental state. Even if cleared, the suspicion would linger. Once you have lived among Xenos, some within the Imperium would always wonder whether you can truly be trusted. For all these reasons, rescue, while desperately hoped for by those stranded, would not necessarily result in a happy ending. It would simply exchange one set of challenges for another, trading physical survival struggles for psychological and social ones. Some rescued individuals might eventually adapt and find a place in Imperial society. Others might struggle for years or the rest of their lives with the trauma of their experience. A few might even come to regret being rescued, finding that the isolation they endured, horrible as it was, had a clarity and purpose that their rescued life lacks. As we reflect on the nature of this particular nightmare being the last human on a Xenos world, certain conclusions become inescapable. First, this situation, while extreme, is not rare in the context of the 41st millennium. The galaxy is vast and violent, and humans are scattered across it in numbers that boggle comprehension. Millions of individuals become separated from their kind every year, and while most die quickly, some survive long enough to experience the full horror of isolation on alien worlds. Second, survival in such circumstances requires a combination of skills, resources, luck, and psychological resilience that few possess in adequate measure. It is not enough to be physically capable or mentally strong. You need all of these things simultaneously, and even then, survival is temporary. The odds are always against you, and they never improve. Each day survived is simply one day closer to the end. Third, the specific nature of the Xenos world matters immensely. Orc worlds kill through violence and toxicity. Tau worlds imprison through comfort and control. Eldar worlds isolate through beauty and incomprehensibility. Tyrannid worlds consume through pure biological horror. Each presents its own challenges, and the strategies that might work on one would fail utterly on another. There is no universal approach to survival in these circumstances. Fourth, the psychological dimension of isolation on Xenos worlds is often more devastating than the physical dangers. Humans are social creatures, and we suffer profoundly when cut off from our kind. The mind begins to deteriorate in isolation, regardless of how well physical needs are met. This deterioration can be slowed through various coping mechanisms, but it cannot be stopped indefinitely. Eventually, the isolation wins. Finally, and perhaps most disturbingly, the Imperium has no real solution to offer for those who find themselves in these circumstances. The Empire is too vast, the resources too limited, the bureaucracy too slow to mount effective rescue operations for individuals. Most stranded humans will live and die alone, their final moments unrecorded, their sacrifices unremembered, their existence forgotten by an Imperium that has no capacity to notice their absence. This is the grim reality of the 41st millennium, a time when humanity's reach extends across the galaxy, but its grasp remains desperately fragile. We claim worlds and sectors, but we cannot guarantee the safety of every individual. We fight endlessly to maintain our place in the galaxy, but in doing so, we create countless situations where humans become separated, lost, stranded. The last human on a Xenos world is not an anomaly, but rather a natural consequence of the Imperium's existence, a cost that is never tallied because doing so would be too overwhelming. Yet, within this darkness, there is something that deserves acknowledgement. Those who survive alone on Xenos worlds, even temporarily, demonstrate a capacity for human endurance that is remarkable. They continue fighting when any rational analysis would suggest surrender. They maintain their humanity, or at least struggle to maintain it, in environments designed to crush human existence. They serve as testimonies to human resilience, even if no one will ever read that testimony. Some might argue that their suffering is meaningless, that enduring alone on a Xenos world accomplishes nothing when the outcome is always death. But meaning is not always about outcomes. Sometimes meaning exists in the struggle itself, in the refusal to submit, in the determination to survive one more day, even when that day will change nothing. The humans who live and die on Xenos worlds, unknown and unremembered, represent something essential about the human spirit. They prove that even in the most desperate circumstances imaginable, even when hope is extinguished and rescue is impossible, humans will continue to fight, to adapt, to survive for as long as survival is possible. In the end, the story of the last human on a Xenos world is not really about Xenos or planets or the specific circumstances of survival. It is about what happens when all the structures and supports that define human existence are stripped away, leaving only the individual facing the universe alone. It is about identity under pressure, about faith tested by abandonment, about the limits of human endurance and the terrible costs of exceeding those limits. It is about all the countless souls who have faced these trials and will continue to face them as long as humanity ventures into the darkness between stars. They deserve to be remembered, even if we cannot remember them individually. They deserve to have their stories told, even if the details are forever lost. They deserve recognition that their suffering and their struggle meant something, even if only to themselves. This is why we examine these scenarios, why we consider these nightmares. Not because we can prevent them, the galaxy is too vast and cruel for that, but because in understanding what it means to be the last human on a Xenos world, we understand something fundamental about what it means to be human at all. So the next time you look up at the stars and remember that each point of light might represent worlds where humanity struggles to maintain its precarious foothold, remember also that on some of those worlds, perhaps on worlds we have never even discovered, there might be a lone human facing impossible odds. They wake each day, not knowing if they will survive to see another dawn. They fight not for glory or reward, but simply because fighting is all they have left. They maintain their humanity in the face of everything that seeks to destroy it. And when they finally fall, as eventually they must, they will do so alone and unwitnessed, their final thoughts unknown to anyone but themselves. This is the reality we must confront if we are to truly understand the galaxy we live in. Not the sanitized version presented in Imperial propaganda, where humanity stands united and strong against alien threats. Not the simplified narrative of good versus evil, human versus Xenos, but the messy, complicated, tragic reality where individuals get lost in the vastness of space and time, where suffering happens on scales we cannot measure, where victory and defeat are often meaningless categories when applied to personal survival. The last human on a Xenos world stands as a symbol of both human weakness and human strength. Weakness, because our grip on the galaxy is so tenuous that individuals can be lost so easily. Strength, because even when lost, even when abandoned and forgotten, humans continue to fight, to survive, to resist extinction for as long as resistance is possible. They are, in their way, the truest servants of the Emperor's vision, maintaining human presence in the galaxy through sheer stubborn refusal to die, through determination that transcends any rational calculation of cost and benefit. Let us consider one final dimension to this nightmare that we have not yet fully explored: the cultural and religious implications of surviving alone on a Xenos world. For most Imperial citizens, the Imperial Creed forms the foundation of their identity. They are taught from birth that humanity is the Emperor's chosen species, destined to inherit the galaxy. The Xenos are abominations, mistakes of creation that must be purged to make way for human dominance. This worldview functions well when surrounded by human culture and institutions, but it becomes almost impossible to maintain when you are alone on an alien world. Consider the daily assault on this worldview that a stranded human would face. Every moment of your existence on a Xenos world proves that humans are not dominant, not unchallengeable, not even particularly well adapted compared to the species that actually evolved for these environments. The orcs thrive in their toxic wastelands, finding joy in violence and chaos that would break most humans. The Tau have built societies that function with an efficiency most Imperial worlds can barely imagine. The Eldar possess technology and culture that predates human civilization by millions of years. The Tyranids consume entire worlds with a biological efficiency that makes Imperial military might seem clumsy and wasteful. This constant contradiction between what you were taught and what you are experiencing creates cognitive dissonance that can be utterly destabilizing. Some humans resolve this by becoming more fanatical in their faith, seeing their survival as proof of the Emperor's protection, interpreting every near miss and lucky break as divine intervention. They pray more fervently, perform rituals with obsessive precision, convinced that their faith is the only thing keeping them alive. In a sense, this might be true, not because the Emperor is actually protecting them, but because the structure and meaning that faith provides gives them the psychological stability needed to continue fighting. Others find their faith cracking under the weight of experience. If the Emperor truly watches over humanity, why are you here? Why are you abandoned, forgotten, left to die alone on an alien world? The standard answers about the Emperor working in mysterious ways or testing his servants become harder to accept when the test seems designed to be impossible to pass. Some humans in these circumstances begin to develop more nuanced understandings of faith, seeing the Emperor less as an active divine presence and more as a symbol of human potential and endurance. They maintain their loyalty to humanity while questioning the specific dogmas they were taught. A very few might go further, beginning to question whether the Imperial Creed's assessment of Xenos is accurate. This is dangerous territory, the first steps toward heresy, but isolation has a way of stripping away comfortable certainties. When you observe Tau society functioning smoothly, providing for its citizens in ways many Imperial worlds do not, it becomes difficult to maintain that all Xenos ways are inherently inferior. When you watch Eldar move through their maiden worlds with grace and purpose that speaks to millions of years of refined culture, it becomes harder to believe that humanity's relatively recent emergence as a galactic power makes it inherently superior. These thoughts would be unthinkable, surrounded by Imperial culture, but alone, with no one to judge or correct your thinking, they become possible. The implications of such thoughts are profound. If the Xenos are not simply abominations to be purged, if they have developed societies and cultures worth acknowledging, then what does that mean for Imperial policy? What does it mean for the endless wars that define human existence in the 41st millennium? What does it mean for your own identity as an Imperial citizen? These are questions that the Imperium never wants its citizens to ask, and for good reason. The entire structure of Imperial society depends on maintaining clear boundaries between human and Xenos, between righteous and abominable. Once those boundaries become blurred, once individual humans begin making their own assessments of alien cultures, the ideological unity that holds the Imperium together begins to fracture. This is why the Inquisition views survivors of extended Xenos contact with such suspicion. It is not just physical contamination they fear, though that is certainly a concern. It is the contamination of ideas, the possibility that exposure to alien ways of thinking might have planted seeds of doubt about Imperial orthodoxy. A soldier who has survived on a Tau world for years might return with uncomfortable questions about why the Imperium cannot provide the same quality of life for its citizens that the Tau provide for theirs. An individual who has observed Eldar society might wonder why humanity abandoned the heights of culture and art that characterize the dark age of technology. These questions are dangerous because they have no good answers within Imperial ideology. Yet, despite these dangers, despite the challenges to faith and identity, many survivors maintain their loyalty to the Imperium and to humanity. This loyalty becomes more meaningful precisely because it is tested and chosen rather than simply accepted. When you have seen alternatives, when you have experienced firsthand that other ways of organizing society exist, and you still choose to identify as human and Imperial, that choice carries weight. It becomes an act of will rather than an accident of birth. This is perhaps why some rescued survivors become such valuable assets to Imperial organizations. They have proven their loyalty under conditions that most humans never face. And that proof makes them trustworthy in ways that ordinary citizens cannot match. Now let us examine specific survival scenarios in more detail, considering the hour-by-hour, day-by-day reality of maintaining existence on these alien worlds. Start with morning on an Orc world. Assuming our human survivor has made it through another night, they wake in their shelter, perhaps a collapsed section of building that the Orcs have not bothered to explore fully. The first task is always the same. Listen. Before moving, before doing anything else, spend several minutes in absolute stillness, listening to the sounds outside. Are there Orcs nearby? The greenskins are not quiet creatures. Their heavy footfalls, their guttural arguments, their constant noise of activity, all provide warning of their presence. If the area sounds clear, the next step is checking equipment. Water filters need cleaning or replacing if possible. Makeshift breathing apparatus needs inspection for damage. Any weapons or tools require maintenance. This routine is crucial not just for practical reasons but for psychological ones. It provides structure, a sense of control, the feeling that you are still a person with agency rather than simply prey waiting to be caught. The survivor might perform a brief prayer or meditation, connecting with faith or simply centering themselves for the day ahead. Leaving shelter is always the most dangerous moment. No matter how carefully you listen, there is always the possibility that orcs are nearby but silent, or that Gretchen are positioned where you cannot hear them. The survivor would need to have multiple exit routes planned, ways to leave their shelter that provide maximum cover and minimum exposure. Movement is slow and cautious, every sense alert for danger. In an orc settlement, the background noise is constant, which is both blessing and curse. It masks your own sounds, but it also makes it harder to hear approaching threats. The daily routine might involve checking several locations for resources. Perhaps there is a water source that needs visiting, a contaminated stream that runs through an area the orcs rarely patrol. Collection would be quick, filling whatever containers are available and retreating immediately. Then there might be scavenging runs to orc refuse piles, looking for anything useful that the greenskins have discarded. This is dangerous work because other scavengers, primarily Gretchen, also frequent these areas. Avoiding them requires patience and timing, waiting for moments when the area is temporarily clear. Food acquisition presents the greatest challenge. Our survivor might maintain a small hidden garden if they were lucky enough to have seeds and have found a location where human-compatible plants can grow despite the toxic environment. Tending this garden requires brief, infrequent visits to avoid creating a noticeable pattern of movement. More likely, they are surviving on stored rations supplemented by whatever can be scavenged, their body slowly consuming itself as insufficient nutrition takes its toll over weeks and months. The middle of the day might be rest time, not because the survivor wants to rest, but because midday is when orc activity peaks. Better to remain hidden in shelter during these hours, conserving energy and avoiding the heightened risk of detection. This is when psychological challenges are greatest. With nothing to do but hide and wait, the mind turns inward. Thoughts become repetitive and dark. This is when maintaining mental discipline becomes most important. Some survivors use this time for equipment maintenance, for updating journals, for prayer and meditation. Others simply endure, counting hours until evening, when movement becomes safer again. Evening brings another foraging expedition, another careful emergence from shelter to check resource locations, perhaps to scout new areas, to observe orc movements and update mental maps of safe routes and dangerous zones. The survivor would need to return to shelter before full darkness, not because night provides better cover, but because navigating in darkness without light sources is nearly impossible, and using light sources would be suicidal. Better to be hidden and stationary through the night, even though this means many hours of enforced immobility. Night on an orc world is its own special horror. The sounds do not stop. Orcs fight and carouse at all hours. Their machinery runs continuously. The survivor lies in their shelter, unable to sleep deeply, constantly on edge, ready to move instantly if discovery threatens. This state of hypervigilance takes a severe physiological toll. The body never fully rests. Stress hormones remain elevated. The immune system becomes compromised. Over time, even if the survivor avoids injury or illness, their health would deteriorate simply from the constant stress of this existence. On a Tau world, the daily routine would be entirely different, but equally challenging. Our survivor might wake in a maintenance tunnel or automated facility, location chosen for minimal surveillance rather than comfort. The first task would be checking for any indication that their presence has been noticed. Have there been changes to the facility's security protocols? Are there additional drones or cameras? The Tau response to anomalies is methodical rather than immediate, which provides both advantage and disadvantage. They will not panic and flood the area with forces, but they will methodically investigate until they understand what is happening. Movement on a Tau world requires understanding the rhythms of automated systems. When do cleaning drones patrol? When do cargo transporters move through corridors? When our shift changes for the few Tau workers who visit automated areas? The survivor would need to have memorized these patterns, moving through brief windows of opportunity when surveillance is at its minimum. This creates a life that is scheduled to the minute. No flexibility, no spontaneity. Every action calculated to exploit temporary gaps in the technological net that surrounds them. Food acquisition on a Tau world might involve sophisticated theft from automated distribution systems. timing actions to coincide with moments when cameras are pointed away, or when the system is processing large quantities that make small discrepancies less noticeable. This requires technical knowledge that not all humans would possess. Those without such skills would be forced to take greater risks, perhaps stealing from less secured locations where detection is more likely. The psychological challenge on a Tau world is the constant feeling of being watched even when you are momentarily unobserved. The surveillance infrastructure is so extensive that you can never truly relax, never fully believe that you are safe. This creates a different kind of stress than on an Orc world. Instead of acute danger requiring instant response, there is chronic anxiety, the knowledge that every moment of safety is temporary, that the net is always tightening, that eventually the Tau systems will correlate enough data to locate you precisely. Survivors on Tau worlds might find themselves in a terrible calculation about integration. The Tau will eventually offer membership in their society if you are captured. Continued hiding becomes more difficult as time passes, and the Tau narrow their search parameters. At some point, many survivors face a choice: continue fighting for an independence that becomes more tenuous every day, or surrender and accept integration into Tau culture. This choice is presented as reasonable by the Tau. They do not understand why any rational being would choose hardship and isolation over comfort and community. For a human raised in Imperial culture, the choice feels like choosing death of identity over death of body, both unacceptable, but one ultimately unavoidable. On an Eldar Maiden world, daily survival follows yet another pattern. Our human survivor might wake in a cave or hollow tree, locations chosen for their remoteness from Eldar paths. The forests provide both concealment and sustenance, but they also present constant navigational challenges. Without landmarks that make sense to human perception, without clear trails to follow, it becomes easy to become disoriented. The survivor would need to develop their own system of navigation, perhaps marking trees in subtle ways that would not be noticed by Eldar observers, creating a personal map of safe routes and dangerous areas. Foraging for food would occupy significant portions of each day. Testing unfamiliar plants to determine which are safe for human consumption is time-consuming and potentially dangerous. The survivor would need to be methodical, trying small amounts and waiting to observe effects before consuming more. This process might take weeks or months to develop a reliable list of safe foods, and during that time, nutrition would be inadequate, leading to progressive weakness and health decline. The greatest daily challenge on a Maiden world is the isolation itself. Unlike Orc or Tau worlds, where there is constant activity to observe and react to, Maiden worlds can go days or weeks without any sign of Eldar presence. This absence of external stimuli forces the survivor to rely entirely on internal resources to maintain psychological stability. Some might cope by talking to themselves, maintaining constant verbal commentary on their activities just to hear human speech. Others might create elaborate mental worlds, living partially in imagination because reality offers so little engagement. The changing of seasons on a Maiden world, following patterns that do not match human expectations, creates additional disorientation. Time becomes difficult to track. Days blend together. The survivor might lose count of how long they have been stranded, unable to distinguish between weeks and months. This temporal disorientation adds to the psychological burden, creating a sense that existence has become unstuck from normal progression, that each day is simultaneously eternal and meaningless. On a Tyranid world, daily survival is less about routine and more about desperate adaptation to constantly worsening conditions. The early days after being stranded might see frantic efforts to seal whatever shelter is available, to gather resources before they are consumed, to establish some base that might provide even temporary safety. As the Tyranid consumption progresses, the survivor would need to constantly relocate, staying ahead of the spreading creep, moving into areas already processed and abandoned. Equipment maintenance becomes critical but increasingly difficult as resources dwindle. Air filters clog faster in the spore-heavy atmosphere. Water recycling systems strain to keep up with contamination. Power cells drain and cannot be recharged. The survivor watches their margins of safety decrease with each passing day, knowing that when critical systems finally fail, death will come quickly afterward. There is no long-term strategy on a tyrannid world, only short-term tactics to buy a few more hours, a few more days. The daily psychological burden is the knowledge that the world itself is dying around you. Watching a planet undergo tyrannid consumption is witnessing extinction on a scale that human minds struggle to process. Every living thing is being dissolved and absorbed. The very ground is being stripped down to bedrock. You are living through an apocalypse, and you are experiencing it alone, without even the cold comfort of dying alongside your species. This existential horror weighs on the mind in ways that acute danger does not. Fear you can process and respond to. Despair is more insidious, eroding will and reason, until the survivor might find themselves wondering why they continue to fight for a few more days of existence that lead nowhere except to the same inevitable end. Understanding these daily realities, these moment-to-moment challenges of survival on Xenos worlds, provides crucial context for appreciating what stranded humans endure. It is not simply a matter of hiding and waiting for rescue that will not come. It is active, constant struggle against environments, hostile on every level, from the air you breathe to the thoughts in your head. It is maintaining humanity and sanity in circumstances designed to destroy both. It is choosing, every single day, to continue existing, even when existence offers nothing but hardship and the promise of solitary death. If you found this exploration of one of the galaxy's darkest nightmares interesting, please consider supporting this channel with a like and subscription. We examine the grim realities of the 41st millennium here, the stories that often go untold because they are too dark or too small to merit attention from the great historians and remembrancers. But these stories matter, and telling them is how we honor those who lived them, even if we will never know their names or the specific details of their struggles. The last human on a Xenos world fights alone, but through channels like this, we ensure they are not forgotten completely. Their nightmare becomes our knowledge, their sacrifice informs our understanding, their endurance reminds us what humanity is capable of, both in terms of survival and suffering. Until next time, remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but in that war, there are countless individual stories of courage, endurance, and the terrible price that humanity pays for its place among the stars.